Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into a Viking longhouse on a night so cold your breath freezes before you finish sighing. Picture it, snow crunching outside, icy wind pressing against timber walls, and the flicker of firelight throwing long skeletal shadows across smoky rafters. You lie down on a bench wrapped in animal skins, and the first thought that hits you is simple: how on earth did anyone survive this? The second thought is sharper: you probably wouldn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone's listening from across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, straight into the heart of a Viking winter. The longhouse stands like a ship frozen on land, ribs of timber, planks sealed with turf and mud, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. Inside it's dim, a narrow world of flicker and shadow. Smoke coils upwards, slow and lazy, collecting under the roof beams until it forms a low ceiling of haze. You can almost feel it cling to your skin, leaving your hair smelling of fire for days. The air is thick enough to taste, wood smoke laced with wet earth, the musk of animals penned at the far end, the sour tang of damp wool drying near the hearth. It's not pleasant, not exactly, but it's alive, every breath proof that the house itself is still holding out against the night. Archaeologists describe these halls as marvels of necessity. Built of heavy timbers and sealed with layers of turf, they were the heartbeat of every Viking farmstead, part dwelling, part fortress, part barn. Some stretched more than 20 meters long, the hearth running straight down the middle like a spine of glowing coals. The fire wasn't just heat, it was life insurance. Without that single strip of flame, everyone inside would have frozen before dawn. And yet, as you lie there now in your imagination, the heat feels uneven. One side of your face burns while the other chills in the draft slipping through gaps in the wall. The air tastes of smoke and salt and something older, something like survival itself. Close your eyes for a moment. You can hear the house breathe, the roof groans under snow, beams expanding and cracking. Outside, the wind howls against the walls, trying to pry them apart. Inside, it's the small sounds that dominate: the soft shuffling of someone turning on a straw mattress, the low grunt of a cow beyond the partition, the hiss of sap bursting in the firewood. The longhouse was never quiet. It was a barn of sound, a living, breathing organism that pulsed through the night. Privacy didn't exist here, neither did silence. Every cough, every sigh, every whispered prayer was shared with everyone else. That shared warmth was the difference between life and death. The Vikings understood, perhaps instinctively, what modern architects would later call thermal mass. Their walls weren't thin planks like medieval cottages further south. They were thick, layered with clay, sod, and straw, designed not to stop the cold but to slow it. The idea wasn't to make the air inside warm. That was impossible, but to make it just warm enough that flesh didn't freeze. They built their houses low, letting the roof press down close to the ground so that heat wouldn't escape. When snow piled high on top, it wasn't a burden, it was insulation, a white blanket gifted by the sky. You might think it sounds claustrophobic, and you'd be right. The air inside a longhouse was stale, smoky, and perpetually damp. But the Vikings didn't measure comfort the way you do. Comfort was a foreign word when survival itself was the prize. To them, the longhouse wasn't a prison of smoke. It was a womb of endurance. The fire at its center was more than a source of warmth. It was the axis around which life revolved. Children were born beside it. Meals were cooked above it. Tales were told by its light. And when people died, the fire still burned, consuming the offerings left for them before they were carried out into the frozen ground. You lie back and stare upward, eyes tracing the beams blackened by centuries of soot. Archaeologists say some timbers from excavated sites are so thick with carbon that they've been preserved like fossils, fireproofed by accident. The wood turned dark and oily by years of smoke. What began as a nuisance became protection. The smoke, choking and relentless, kept away insects and rot. In its own strange way, it kept the building alive longer than it had any right to survive. There's something poetic about that the same smoke that stung their eyes and burned their throats also kept their homes from crumbling. You shift in your imagination, adjusting the rough fur beneath you. The bedding crackles faintly. A mix of straw and wool, thin as the line between comfort and misery. The heat from the fire reaches you only in waves, as if the air itself can't decide whether to help or hurt. You cough once, feel the dryness in your throat, and think of what a Viking child might have thought lying there centuries ago. Maybe they whispered to the gods for warmth. Maybe they just stared into the darkness, listening to the same sounds you hear now, the hiss of fire, the groan of timber, the faint hum of wind seeping through the cracks. One thing becomes clear as you sink deeper into the moment. The longhouse was not built to be comfortable. It was built to make discomfort survivable. Every part of it was an act of negotiation with the cold. The walls didn't keep winter out so much as slow its advance. The fire didn't chase away darkness, but made it tolerable. The bodies packed together didn't erase the chill. They diluted it. And so, night after night, families lay shoulder to shoulder, coughing through smoke, blinking through tears, and calling it home. Now imagine stepping outside for a moment. Just beyond the door, the air hits like a hammer, sharp, crystalline, and almost painful to inhale. The snow glows blue under the aurora, each breath turning to frost before your eyes. And then, as you turn back toward the house, you notice the faint halo of smoke leaking from the roof ridge, the only sign of life in a landscape otherwise frozen to silence. Inside that smoky cocoon, people breathe, eat, and sleep. Against all logic, they live. You step back in, closing the heavy wooden door behind you. The warmth, thin, fragile, human-made, rushes to meet you. It smells like smoke and sweat and safety. The fire sputters, logs collapsing into a pool of embers, but still it burns. You settle again on your straw bed, pull the fur tighter, and feel the strange comfort of survival pressing close around you. The cold never leaves. Not entirely, but neither does the warmth. They live together here, enemies forced into truce by the will of those who refuse to die quietly in the dark. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, the longhouse hums with breath, smoke, and the steady pulse of life enduring. And as you drift between waking and sleep, one truth settles over you like the weight of fur. The Vikings didn't conquer winter, they learned to sleep through it. You wake to the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of wind pressing through gaps in the turf walls. For a moment you forget where you are, then you smell it, the thick perfume of wood smoke, damp earth and animal breath, and you remember, you're inside a Viking longhouse, a structure less built than grown, as though the earth itself decided to raise a shelter. In a way, that's exactly what happened. The longhouse wasn't just made from the land, it was an extension of it, part architecture, part landscape, and all survival. The walls are alive in their own way. They breathe, expand, and settle with every change in temperature. You can feel their slow exhale when the fire warms them, the faint tick of contracting fibers as night stretches on. These aren't simple walls of planks and nails. They're layers of timber, sod, and mud, packed so tightly that the line between home and hill disappears. From the outside, the longhouse barely rises above the landscape, a hump of green and brown blending into the snow-covered field. In summer, grass grows across its back. In winter, frost glitters there like a second sky. The idea was practical genius. The turf acted like a primitive insulation blanket, trapping pockets of air between roots and soil. Cold wind that could tear through wood slid harmlessly across the earth-smeared surface. The Vikings didn't invent the concept, but they perfected it, shaping a form of architecture that worked with nature's logic rather than against it. Even now, Archaeologists marvel at how these structures endured centuries of brutal weather. The walls might sag, the roof might smoke, but they kept the heart of the household alive. You trace your eyes along the interior, noticing the rough beauty of it. No plastered symmetry, no polished beams, just raw wood blackened by soot, mud flaking from the corners, and the faint shimmer of frost where the cold sneaks in. It feels both ancient and familiar, like the interior of a body. The wooden ribs arch above you, curved slightly inward, as if the entire house has curled up against the cold. Outside, snow drifts pile against the walls. Inside, they become part of the structure, adding weight, yes, but also warmth. It's counterintuitive but true. A house buried in snow breathes easier than one exposed to the air. Archaeological digs across Norway and Iceland show this same pattern over and over again. Thick turf roofing, low ceilings, inward-leaning walls. They weren't mistakes or primitive construction quirks. They were deliberate choices, survival logic carved into architecture. The roof was low not just to keep in heat, but to prevent collapse under the weight of ice. The walls leaned because straight timbers would snap under strain. Everything you see around you was designed to yield just enough without breaking, to bend with winter's violence. The result was a living structure, one that survived by adapting, the same way its builders did. You run your hand along a timber beam and feel centuries of soot pressed into its grain. Black dust rubs off on your fingers, ancient residue from countless fires, breaths, and winters. It's not decay, it's memory. Every fleck of carbon, every blistered knot in the wood, is a record of nights just like this. Families breathing, animals shifting, smoke curling toward the roof. The smell of it is almost narcotic. Old fire, damp moss, faint manure, a scent equal parts disgusting and comforting. It's the smell of life continuing, and that, in this frozen world, is all that matters. You shift your weight and hear the wall creak softly. It sounds almost human, like a sigh. The Vikings believed their homes had spirits, landvater, guardian beings of the land and structure. Maybe they were right. When a storm howled outside, the longhouse answered in kind, timbers groaning, roof settling, walls murmuring as wind slipped through. The house was not an object but a companion, a thing that endured beside you. You gave offerings at its threshold, muttered prayers to its beams, trusted it to hold back death. There's something profoundly humbling about that relationship. In your world, houses keep the elements out. Here the elements still have a seat at the table. The cold creeps in under the door, the fire spits back at you, and the walls themselves drink in the moisture of every breath. The Vikings didn't pretend to dominate their environment. They learned to live inside it. Literally, their homes were part of the earth's skin, their walls stitched together with soil, straw, and spirit. Now imagine it. In the depth of winter, the air outside is brittle, snapping like glass against bare skin. The landscape is silent but for the occasional caw of a raven. Yet, under that mound of turf, light flickers, smoke slips through the ridgehole in the roof, catching moonlight like a phantom banner. Inside, life pulses in 100 small ways, the sound of knives scraping bowls, the crackle of embers, a child coughing in sleep. The longhouse breathes, shallow, smoky, but steady. You wonder how many generations slept beneath this same roofline, how many winters these walls have endured. Each repair layer, new turf, new clay, carries the fingerprints of those who came before. Maybe that's the true genius of Viking design. It wasn't just built once. It was tended, season after season, like a living creature. When cracks formed, they packed them with moss. When drafts grew strong, they layered more earth. Maintenance wasn't a chore. It was a ritual, a way of reaffirming their pact with the world outside. A gust shakes the walls, dust drifting down like grey snow. You pull your cloak closer and listen. The sound is intimate. The low moan of timber, the slow sigh of sod shifting on the roof. It's the house's heartbeat. and beneath it you hear your own, sinking with it, as if you've become part of this buried organism of warmth and endurance. What strikes you most is the contrast. How this shelter feels both ancient and shockingly efficient. In your age of double-glazed windows and electric heat, this structure should feel primitive. Yet, as you lie there, you realize it accomplishes the same goal by far simpler means. Earth, wood, snow, and fire. 4 elements working in balance, holding life in the thin space between freezing and breathing. Outside, a wolf howls somewhere across the tundra. Inside, the longhouse exhales in answer, the fire hissing, the walls groaning, the air pulsing with shared warmth. You reach out and touch the timber again, feeling the faint vibration of its living weight. The wall feels like bone, the roof like skin, and in that strange, smoky quiet, you finally understand the Vikings didn't build their homes against nature. They built them out of it. The fire is the first thing you notice when you open your eyes again, or perhaps it's what kept you from truly sleeping. In the Viking longhouse, fire is not just a tool, it is a deity. It smoulders at the center of everything, its breath rising in a slow, ghostly column that wavers beneath the roof beams. There's no fireplace, no chimney, just an open hearth carved directly into the packed earth floor. It is small, almost insultingly small, by your standards, yet it commands the entire room. Every life in the longhouse orbits it like planets around a sun that might at any moment decide to die out. You shift closer to it, careful not to breathe too deeply. The smoke, trapped beneath the rafters, drifts low, forcing you to hunch. The air tastes like sap and ash, sharp and acrid, biting the back of your throat. Your eyes sting. Tears blur the room into an amber haze. You cough once, and someone on the other side of the hall coughs back, an echo of shared suffering that has probably been going on here for centuries. Yet no one moves the fire. No one dares. It sits exactly where generations before decided it should, at the center, where it can touch everyone equally. In a modern sense, it's a design nightmare. The Vikings slept, cooked, worked, and mended gear in the same smoky cavern. The roof had a gap at the ridge, a primitive vent that was supposed to let the smoke escape. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When the wind shifted, the room filled like a kiln, and everyone's eyes watered until they looked half drunk. Archaeologists who've reconstructed these houses report feeling dizzy after half an hour inside. Imagine doing that every night of your life. The irony is that the same smoke slowly killing your lungs was also what preserved the wood and kept insects and rot away. Death and preservation, hand in hand, the Viking way. You watch the fire carefully. It's mesmerizing. Not a blaze, but a slow, breathing creature. A few logs cut from birch and pine glow from the inside like molten iron. Someone prods them with a stick, and sparks leap into the air, floating upward in delicate spirals. For a brief moment, you glimpse them against the dark rafters like stars trapped in the ceiling. Then they vanish, swallowed by smoke. You can almost hear the wood whisper as it burns, resin sighing and crackling. The heat it gives off is uneven, a wave of warmth that stops halfway across the room. On one side you sweat, on the other frost creeps along the wall. Every Viking family had its own method for managing that fickle balance. Some kept a low, steady flame burning all night, feeding it with peat or driftwood scavenged from the coast. Others let it die down, relying on layers of bedding and body heat to carry them until dawn. Firewood was precious, especially in Iceland and Greenland, where trees were scarce. You didn't waste it on comfort. You burned only as much as you needed to stay alive. The hearth wasn't just physical warmth. It was spiritual insurance. Old Norse poems mention elder and fire and spirit as two halves of the same essence. To tend the hearth was to tend the soul of the household. Women often oversaw the flame, adding wood, stirring embers, guarding it against drafts. The household's entire fortune was thought to depend on its steady glow. If it went out, bad luck followed. You can almost imagine someone rising quietly in the middle of the night, bare feet padding across the packed earth, to nudge the fire back to life. The layout of the longhouse makes more sense now. The hearth is central because it must be. Any further to the side and half the family would freeze. The walls curve inward to funnel heat upward, but not too fast. The ceiling traps the smoke because a little bit of trapped smoke is a blessing. It kills lice, hardens meat hanging to dry, and coats the rafters with a tar that repels rot. It's a delicate chemistry of discomfort. The Vikings didn't mind a little suffering. They considered it part of the bargain of existence. You squint through the haze and notice shapes moving on the other side, dim silhouettes crouched near the fire, turning spits of meat or stirring thick stew. The smell of it hits you next, fatty, smoky, tinged with herbs and something wild, maybe goat or reindeer. It's not a feast, it's sustenance. And yet, in the dead of winter, even that smells like a miracle. Someone laughs softly, a low, hoarse sound, and you catch a flicker of teeth in the firelight. For a moment, the longhouse feels less like a cave and more like a heartbeat. It's strange to think of comfort emerging from this choking haze, but it does. The fire doesn't just warm the room, it lights it. Without it, you'd be blind. Even a small flame gives the illusion of security, a fragile defiance against the vast dark pressing outside. You can imagine Viking children lying awake, tracing the play of shadows on the wall, seeing faces in the smoke. You can imagine old men whispering sagas beside the embers, their words curling upward to mingle with soot and myth. In this light, the longhouse is not just a building, it's a forge where stories and warmth are hammered out in the same breath. And yet, there's always danger. Fire giveth, and fire taketh away. A single spark could consume the entire structure. Archaeologists have found longhouse remains with clear signs of fire, blackened layers of soil, charred bones, melted tools. Once the roof caught, the smoke hole acted like a chimney, turning the house into a torch. The inhabitants had no choice but to flee barefoot into snow, watching their world collapse in orange flame. You picture it and shiver, realizing that every warm breath you take in this place is balanced on a knife's edge. Still, the Vikings never abandoned the open hearth, even when later builders experimented with stone stoves or enclosed pits. Most kept the old design, tradition maybe, or trust in what had always worked. The fire was not just practical, it was sacred. It was where life gathered. Around it, families planned voyages, carved tools, told legends, and shared silence. It was the one constant in a world of storms and shifting ice. You lean closer, letting the heat kiss your face. The light ripples across the room, illuminating bits of life, a woven basket, a bone comb, a hanging fish drying in smoke. Everything here smells of ash and effort. You understand now. That warmth was never taken for granted. It was earned every night, coaxed from wood and air, guarded like a secret. The fire crackles again, and you can almost imagine it laughing, a soft crackling mockery of your modern comforts. It has seen 1,000 winters, and it will see 1,000 more, even if the house around it falls. You blink through the haze and smile despite yourself. This, you realize, is what survival sounds like. By now, the smoke feels almost like another person in the room, a constant, restless presence drifting around your head, curling through your hair, slipping down your throat. You can't escape it, but after a while, you stop fighting. You learn to breathe around it, like the Vikings did. They understood something few modern people ever have to think about. Air is both life and danger. Too little, and you suffocate. Too much, and the cold seeps in, stealing the warmth from your bones. Every night in the longhouse was a delicate balancing act between breath and frost. The Viking builders didn't have chimneys, not in the modern sense. They had loft holes, crude openings at the roof ridge, meant to let out the thickest smoke, but they could be closed by a slab of wood or turf when the wind turned savage. If you left it open, You might freeze before morning. If you closed it too tight, you'd choke on your own fire. So every evening, someone, often the head of the household, would study the wind like a sailor, judging how much air the house could afford to lose that night. It wasn't superstition. It was science before the word existed. You lie there and feel the house exhale, faint drafts pulling the smoke upwards, slow eddies swirling above the fire. The air is thick enough to blur the edges of the room, turning people into silhouettes. In the dim orange light, you can barely tell where one body ends and another begins. It's easy to imagine spirits living in that haze, the souls of ancestors drawn to the warmth. The Vikings certainly believed they were near. Smoke was their bridge between worlds, upward to the gods, downward to the buried. When they lit the hearth, they weren't just warming themselves, they were keeping the invisible company of the dead. But the science of it remains brutal. The carbon from the wood builds up in the rafters, slowly blackening them until they glisten like obsidian. That soot paradoxically becomes protection. It seals the wood from rot, drives out insects, and gives the beams a faint, oily scent that clings for decades. If you run your hand along one, you come away with fingertips stained black. That blackness was everywhere, on clothes, on faces, even inside lungs. Some skeletons found at Viking sites show dark patches in the ribs, evidence, scientists think, of years breathing that same acrid smoke. To live warm was to live marked. Still, the Vikings managed it. They built their ventilation like an art form, learned through generations of trial and error. They placed the fire pit's dead center to keep air circulating evenly, and carved small vents near the gables to let smoke wander out when the gods were kind. In larger halls, the smoke rose into a loft space, a dim upper chamber where meat hung to dry, slowly curing in the haze. You can almost picture it, long strips of salmon, goat, and seal meat, swaying gently, turning glossy and dark in the perpetual semi-fog. The very discomfort of Viking air became a kind of preservation. What didn't kill them, quite literally, fed them. You close your eyes and listen. The air hums faintly, a deep, resonant tone created by wind passing over the vent holes. It sounds almost musical, like the low drone of a horn in the distance. Some scholars think this eerie resonance inspired parts of Viking myth, the sense that gods spoke through the elements, that Odin himself might murmur through the timbers when storms rolled in. Maybe that's why the sagas are full of voices from wind and fire. When you live surrounded by noise and darkness, the imagination fills every silence. Still, life demanded practical adjustments. The women of the house, whose eyes were constantly exposed to smoke, often wore simple wool veils indoors, not for modesty but for comfort. Children were taught to sleep on the side farthest from the fire, where the air was thinner but safer. You'd think the cold would be unbearable there, but bodies packed together changed the math. Even at the smoky edges, the temperature hovered just above freezing, enough for survival, if not for comfort, and for a Viking, survival was comfort enough. There's a moment each night when the smoke thickens so much that it feels like you're underwater. Breathing becomes work. Every inhale drags warmth in with pain. Every exhale leaves a ghostly cloud in front of your face. That's when someone will stand and stir the fire, using a long iron poker to shift the logs. Sparks explode upward, chasing new paths for the smoke to rise. The air clears slightly. You can hear people coughing, clearing their throats, muttering small oaths in the dark. Then, silence again, save for the crackle of wood and the distant snort of a cow from the animal pen. The Vikings didn't have words for air quality or ventilation, but they understood equilibrium better than most of us. The longhouse worked because it was porous, because it leaked just enough. Total isolation from the cold would have meant suffocation. Total openness meant death by frost. Between those two extremes lay a fragile middle ground, maintained by instinct, habit, and patience. You can almost admire it, an entire civilization surviving inside a contradiction. Sometimes the wind outside would shift suddenly, pushing cold air through the vents so fast that the fire sputtered. The room would go black except for a few dying coals, and panic would flutter through the dark. Someone would rush to block the vent, someone else to fan the embers. In that frantic minute, everyone would hold their breath, as if to lend what oxygen they could to the flame. When it finally roared back to life, the exhale that followed wasn't just relief, it was gratitude. In a place like this, you learn to thank the air for staying alive in it. You look up toward the smoky ceiling. The beams above you disappear into a fog that glows faintly from the fire below. You can't see the stars, but you know they're there, somewhere beyond the haze and the frozen roof. Maybe the Vikings looked up the same way, seeing the smoke hole as a window to the divine. Through that opening, they imagined their prayers rising into the cold sky, half breath, half hope, carrying with them the smell of fire and home. As you drift in and out of drowsiness, the Longhouse feels suspended in its own weather system. Warmth, smoke, and frost swirl together, none winning, none yielding. You breathe shallowly, matching the rhythm of the house's breath, and realize that this balance, this fragile truce between heat and death, is what kept an entire world alive. The air isn't kind, but it is honest. It gives exactly what it must, and nothing more. You wake again in the dim half-light before dawn, eyes sore, throat dry, body stiff as wood. The fire has sunk into a bed of dull orange coals, and the smoke has thinned into a soft blue fog that floats just above your head. The house smells of sleep, sour wool, charred wood, old breath, a scent so thick it feels like history itself. You pull the fur tighter around your shoulders, and the texture of it startles you, rough, greasy, alive in its own way. This is not the clean, fluffy pelt you might imagine draped over a museum exhibit. It's the real thing, worn and matted by years of use, heavy with the oils of sweat and smoke. It has survived more winters than you can count. The sleeping arrangements inside a Viking longhouse are practical, not polite. There are no bedrooms, no partitions for privacy, just a series of wooden benches running along both walls. Each bench doubles as bed, seat, and storage chest. You lie on one now, little more than a plank softened by straw, its edges polished by countless elbows and hips. Beneath you, a shallow space hides tools, clothing, and sacks of dried grain. Above you, the ceiling droops low enough that you can touch the beams with an outstretched hand. It feels less like a room and more like the inside of a ship, cramped, purposeful, and perfectly efficient. The Vikings understood that sleep wasn't about comfort, it was about conserving heat. The benches are raised for a reason, warm air rises, and by sleeping a foot or two above the cold floor, you steal that warmth before it disappears into the roof. The difference between freezing and surviving could be the height of a wooden plank. You shift slightly, feeling the faint warmth trapped under the furs, the heat of your own body reflecting back at you. It's not cozy exactly, but it's intimate, a quiet bodily truce with the night. You can almost hear the logic behind every layer of bedding. First comes the straw, the universal mattress of the north. It crackles faintly as you move, releasing the dry, sweet scent of old grass. It's cheap, abundant, and replaceable. Above it lies a coarse wool blanket, woven thick enough to block wind and smoke alike. The wool prickles your skin but holds warmth like a secret. Then come the animal skins, reindeer if you're rich, goat or sheep if you're not, spread over everything like a final, defiant shield. Each layer traps air, each breath adds to the shared heat. The result is a fragile ecosystem of warmth that depends on discipline. You can't thrash around or steal the blanket. If one person rolls away, everyone feels the draft. In some households, people slept in pairs, back to back, the way sailors later would at sea. Others lay in lines, overlapping slightly like shingles on a roof. It sounds awkward until you realize how quickly shared body heat can turn a freezing bench into a survivable cocoon. The Vikings didn't romanticize this closeness. It was physics, not affection. In the half-dark, you make out the shapes of others sleeping nearby. A man's rough snore rises and falls like the bellows of a forge. A child whimpers, and somewhere a woman murmurs a lullaby too soft to catch. The sound is almost like waves on a shore, each breath blending into the next, a communal rhythm that holds the house together. You wonder how many generations have breathed this same rhythm, how many nights this exact pattern of sleeping, coughing, sighing has echoed under the same smoke-stained roof. You pull the fur tighter and feel the texture of its seams, stitched crudely with sinew, patched with scraps of hide. Nothing here is new. Everything has been repaired 100 times. The Vikings valued durability over beauty. Even luxury was meant to last. A good pelt could serve as bedding, cloak, or sail cover. When it grew too tattered for sleeping, it was cut into strips for shoes or reins. Waste was a foreign concept. In a world where every object cost effort and breath, nothing was ever truly discarded. You roll slightly and hear the soft crunch of straw beneath you. The sound is strangely comforting, proof that you still have something between you and the frozen ground. Archaeologists have found remnants of this same straw in longhouse ruins, sometimes charred, sometimes perfectly preserved under layers of ash. The carbon trapped inside tells a story of endless replacement. New straw added each season, the old swept out and burned. It wasn't cleanliness. It was maintenance, a cycle of renewal. Every spring, when the snow melted, families would strip their benches bare, scrub the wood with ash water, and refill them with fresh-cut hay. That first night on clean straw was the closest thing to a luxury bed you'd get. Your eyes wander to the far end of the hall, where the fire flickers low, casting shadows across the sleeping faces. There's something deeply human about it. The shared vulnerability of a dozen people trusting the same fragile warmth. In this world, you don't sleep alone. You can't. Isolation is death. The body beside you might be your spouse, your child, your cousin, or a visiting trader you barely know, but once the night sets in, those distinctions fade. Everyone becomes part of the same equation, one long, breathing body trying not to freeze. It's hard not to think about dreams in a place like this. The sagas speak often of dreams, omens, visions, visitations from ancestors. Maybe that's because the line between sleeping and waking here is so thin. The constant smoke, the low oxygen, the rhythm of shared breath, it blurs everything. You can imagine slipping into a dream and still hearing the crackle of the fire, the shuffle of animals beyond the partition. Maybe that's what the old poets meant when they wrote of walking between worlds. In the Viking night, everyone lived half in smoke, half in spirit. The straw rustles again as someone shifts nearby, muttering something in a voice half asleep. The sound of it drifts over you like a tide, and for a moment you feel the collective weight of centuries pressing down. This is how they survived, not through conquest or divine blessing, but through small acts of endurance. A raised bed, a layer of straw, a fur shared between two people. The miracle isn't that the Vikings endured the cold, it's that they managed to rest inside it. You exhale slowly, watching your breath rise toward the smoky ceiling. The warmth is temporary. The cold waits just beyond the walls, patient as time. But for now, in this fragile little pocket of heat and humanity, you are safe. The fire sighs, the straw settles, and the house breathes with you. Against all odds, you sleep. When you wake again, the light is grey and dim, like water leaking through the seams of the world. You can't tell if it's morning or just another dream, but the air feels heavier, cooler, as if the night has left something behind. The fire has shrunk to its bones, a few glowing coals breathing faintly in a nest of ash. Someone has already risen. You can hear the soft rustle of movement, the clink of a pot, the faint sigh of someone blowing life back into the embers. The smell changes. Smoke, yes, but also meat fat, wool, and something faintly sweet, almost like resin. Then you see it. Near the wall, stacked neatly on a wooden rack, is the Viking equivalent of a treasure chest, pelts from half the known world. Furs were the Vikings' softest form of wealth, their insurance against death, their trade coin, their luxury, and their identity. Every piece you touch carries the geography of another place. Thick grey reindeer hide from Norway's northern mountains, the silver gleam of Arctic fox from Lapland, the heavy warmth of bearskin from forests so deep the sun barely touches them. You run your hand across one and feel the faint trace of grease still clinging to it, not filth, but the natural oils that make it water resistant. The Viking longhouse, for all its smoke and hardship, was a museum of fur. They slept on it, dressed in it, traded it, and sent it across oceans to kings and merchants who had never seen the creatures it came from. To wear fur was to wear survival. The richest among them flaunted furs like symbols of victory. Marten, otter, ermine, lynx, each one representing a trade route, a conquest, or a winter overcome. Even a modest household might have one prized pelt kept purely for guests, spread over the sleeping bench when someone important visited. It wasn't vanity, it was hospitality with teeth. Archaeologists have found fragments of these pelts preserved in graves, stiff, oily remnants pressed against rusted buckles and bone. Some are reindeer, others beaver or fox. They were so valuable that even in death people refused to part with them. One chieftain's burial mound contained enough fur to line an entire small house. Each piece had been cut carefully, folded in layers, a final offering to the cold that had defined their lives. Even the gods, they thought, must have a use for warmth. You look at the benches again, and notice the layering rough wool underneath, fur above. The fur always faces inward, the soft side touching skin, the outer side turned outward to block the drafts. The logic is perfect. Air trapped between layers becomes insulation, and the natural oils of the fur repel the damp creeping in from the sod walls. The Vikings didn't have modern waterproofing, but they didn't need it. Nature provided better armor than any craftsman could forge. And the trade of it, that was the true genius. From the 9th to the 11th centuries, Viking ships carried fur from Scandinavia to Constantinople, Baghdad, even the markets of North Africa. Traders called it the white gold of the north. A single Arctic fox pelt could fetch enough silver to buy a slave, a small fortune sealed in softness. The irony was almost poetic. Warmth, that most fragile of things, became a currency strong enough to move empires. You imagine a Norse trader unfurling a seal fur before a Byzantine merchant, both pretending not to notice the frostbite creeping into their fingers. Even the tools of fur preparation were part of the longhouse rhythm. In one corner, stretched hides hang over wooden frames, scraped clean with bone knives, dried in the smoky air. The smell is sharp and animal, a mix of tallow, ash, and something musky. The smoke doesn't just dry the pelts, it preserves them, driving out insects and sealing in the oils. The same fire that warms your bed also turns fur into something nearly immortal. Centuries later, archaeologists still find these skins almost intact, darkened but supple, outlasting the hands that once sewed them. You lift a pelt and wrap it around your shoulders, feeling how it molds to your shape. It's astonishing how quickly warmth returns, how a few layers of nature's armor can defy the raw air clawing at the walls. This is why reindeer herding and hunting were so sacred. The animal wasn't just food, it was architecture. You wore it, slept on it, and sometimes, when the firewood ran low, burned its hide for one last night of warmth. Nothing went to waste. The Vikings respected the creatures they killed, not out of sentiment but gratitude. Each animal was another day's survival. There's a myth told in the far north of a god who sleeps wrapped in the hide of a bear he once hunted, dreaming of endless winter. They said the god's warmth seeps into the world each spring when the snow melts, as repayment for the bear's gift. You can almost understand that logic here. Each pelt carries the ghost of an animal that endured what no human could, and when you lie beneath it, some of that endurance becomes your own. You glance around the longhouse, at the people now stirring awake under their layered hides. Faces emerge slowly from the furs, hair tangled, eyes blinking against the smoke. Someone yawns, someone else laughs softly. The room feels alive again, a slow resurrection that happens every morning. Outside, frost coats the landscape in silence, but inside, everything moves. Someone feeds the fire, someone milks a goat, someone sharpens a blade. It's a choreography of survival that begins the moment the first pelt is thrown off. You lie back again, fur still draped over your shoulders, and think about how strange it is that warmth was once such an achievement. You don't just have it, you earn it. Every breath, every stitch, every trade across a frozen sea is a fight against extinction. You inhale the scent of the fur, smoky, oily, faintly sweet, and realize that the Vikings didn't live in defiance of nature. They lived inside it, clothed in its generosity and cruelty alike. The coals pop softly, and light spills through the smoke hole, painting the furs in shades of bronze and gold. For a fleeting moment, the longhouse looks less like a shelter and more like a cathedral. Its beams a forest of pillars, its smoke a holy incense, its warmth a kind of prayer, and wrapped in your stolen warmth. You understand why the Vikings never feared the cold. They didn't conquer it. They wore it. By the time the fire steadies again, the house is fully awake. The rhythm of life inside a Viking longhouse is never silent. It hums like a hive layered with sounds you can feel more than hear. The scrape of iron against wood, the low murmur of voices, the sharp bleat of a goat in the far pen, all of it blending into something oddly intimate, like a family heartbeat amplified by timber and smoke. You rise slowly, the fur slipping from your shoulders, and it feels like leaving another body behind. The benches along the wall are emptying one by one, each revealing a small patch of straw and a cloud of breath. Children scurry barefoot across the packed earth, chasing the warmth that clings to the fire. Their laughter feels defiant, as if mocking the cold. Adults move slower, deliberate, heavy, carrying the fatigue of 1,000 such mornings. Some stir pots of thin porridge or meat broth. Others mend clothes or feed the animals kept inside the house. It's chaos, but it's coordinated chaos, a daily symphony that keeps the whole organism alive. You notice now how close everyone is, not just in space but in rhythm. The longhouse isn't divided into rooms because there's no point pretending privacy exists when 40 people share the same breath. Families, servants, guests, and even the occasional traveler all sleep side by side. Rank still matters. The household head gets the warmest spot near the central fire, but beyond that, hierarchy melts away each night under the same blanket of necessity. The warmth doesn't discriminate, neither does the cold. At first it feels claustrophobic, even suffocating. You can barely stretch without brushing someone else's arm or leg. The air is thick with movement and smell, wood smoke, stew, sweat, wet wool, and that faint animal musk that never really fades. Yet after a while, it stops feeling crowded and starts feeling human. The Vikings didn't build walls between each other, they built proximity. In the long dark months of winter, closeness was the only insulation that truly worked. Some scholars call it the communal body. It's not a poetic phrase, it's literal. Every human inside the longhouse becomes a unit of heat, part of a shared furnace of breath and skin. You can imagine how it must have felt after a long day of work, bodies collapsing side by side, the sound of breathing turning into one collective sigh, children tucked between adults, elders wrapped near the fire, animals penned at the far end, adding their warmth to the mix, each life fueling the next. The boundaries between human, animal, and architecture blur until the whole structure becomes one organism with a single purpose: survival. The arrangement itself is deliberate. Archaeologists have found impressions of benches and sleeping areas clustered close to the central hearth, leaving only narrow aisles to walk through. Those aisles were where daily life happened. Weaving, carving, storytelling, all within the circle of heat. Beyond that circle, toward the walls, temperatures could drop dangerously low. It's why everyone slept pressed together like logs in a pile, conserving every fraction of warmth. Even your breath mattered. On the coldest nights, the air near the floor would freeze into a thin film of frost, and by morning it would melt under the collective exhale of the room. You can almost picture it, ice turning to vapor, then vanishing into the smoke, a small, silent victory. You watch a mother braid her daughter's hair while stirring a pot with the other hand. Her fingers move automatically, as if trained by countless identical mornings. The girl, eyes half shut, leans closer to the fire, her breath making small ghosts in the air. Nearby, an old man sharpens a knife, the rasping sound steady and soothing. Someone feeds hay to a cow just behind a timber partition. The animal snorts, the smell of its hide rolling through the room. It should be unpleasant, but it's strangely reassuring. Every sound and scent reminds you that you're surrounded by life. There's laughter now too. Low, tired laughter, but laughter nonetheless. The Vikings were not a solemn people. They teased, they sang, they told stories, even in the bleakest weather. Some sagas describe entire nights spent awake by the hearth, drinking ale, and sharing tales while storms battered the roof. You can almost hear it, the rhythmic rise and fall of voices, the deep, slow laughter of people who've seen too many winters to be impressed by another. In those moments, the Longhouse must have felt like a ship in a storm, the world outside howling, but inside, a small island of warmth and sound refusing to go under. You catch the faint scent of roasted barley and realize breakfast is ready. The food is simple but hearty, a porridge of grains and animal fat, thick enough to chew. Someone passes a wooden bowl your way, and you take it carefully, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. It's astonishing how much comfort a single warm meal provides in this place. You eat slowly, savoring each mouthful like it's a ritual. Maybe it is. Every act here, eating, breathing, sleeping, feels sacred when it's the only thing standing between you and the cold. As the morning light strengthens, you notice details you missed before: the glimmer of frost on the timbers, the soft sheen of soot catching sunlight through the smoke hole, the faint blue shimmer of snow reflected from outside. The Longhouse feels less like a prison now and more like a womb, dark, warm, alive with the hum of shared existence. Even the coughs and snores seem to belong here, part of the rhythm that defines the place. You think about modern solitude, how easy it is to seal yourself away from others, to live without hearing another person breathe. The Vikings didn't have that luxury, and maybe they didn't want it. They were social by necessity, but also by instinct. Togetherness was survival, and survival was togetherness. You can almost envy it, that raw, unfiltered proximity to life. Here, loneliness would feel like the true danger, not the cold. Someone adds wood to the fire, and the flames surge up, throwing shadows against the walls. For a moment, everyone pauses, watching the light flicker across familiar faces. It's quiet, almost reverent, a shared acknowledgement that this flame, this air, these bodies are the only reasons anyone is still breathing. The warmth ripples outward again, brushing your skin, and you realize that the Longhouse doesn't just keep people alive, it teaches them how to live together, in the literal heat of one another. And as you look around the smoky hall, at faces lit in gold and amber, it hits you, the miracle of Viking survival wasn't in their weapons or ships or gods. It was right here, in this fragile, crowded world of straw and breath, where dozens of hearts learn to beat in time with the fire. By evening, the air in the Longhouse thickens again, and the sounds change. The sharpness of morning work fades into the low, steady rhythm of animals shifting in their stalls. You might think of livestock as background noise, inconvenient, smelly, something to keep outside. But here they're part of the household, breathing warmth into the same air, sharing the same fragile heat. The Vikings didn't just build homes for themselves. They built homes for their animals too, because without them, everyone inside would freeze. At the far end of the hall, past a timber partition darkened by soot and age, you can hear the low, wet sound of cows chewing, the clink of a wooden pail, the soft bleating of goats. The smell is unmistakable. Manure, hay, wet fur, and a sweetness that only comes from animal life. It's a scent that clings to everything, the benches, the clothes, the air itself. It should be unpleasant, but in the dead of winter, it's reassuring. It means warmth. It means survival. The heat rising from the animals seeps through the house like a second fire, low and steady, the kind that never burns out. You step closer and feel it. A subtle change in temperature, barely a few degrees, but enough to notice. The floor beneath you is warmer, soft with straw that absorbs moisture and manure alike. A cow exhales beside you, and its breath rolls out in great clouds of mist. It's startling how human it feels, how alive the space becomes when animal and person share the same rhythm of breath. Archaeologists have long known that the Vikings and their livestock lived under the same roof, separated only by a half wall or wooden partition. It wasn't laziness or lack of hygiene, it was physics. Every animal was a living furnace. A single cow can give off as much heat as a small fire, and a few goats or sheep together could keep a corner of the hall above freezing even in the worst weather. The Vikings didn't need thermometers to know this. They learned it through generations of necessity. In Iceland, entire houses were built with the animal pens directly adjoining the living space, the heat of beasts flowing upward through cracks in the floorboards. It was less farmhouse and more shared body. You can imagine the nightly symphony of it. The snorts, the slow clop of hooves, the rhythmic chewing echoing through the timber. It must have been maddening at first, then strangely comforting. Those sounds meant you'd make it through another night. You pause beside a cow, watching the steam curl from its nostrils, the slow blink of its heavy-lidded eyes. It smells of hay and earth and something ancient. The smell of survival. A calf stirs nearby, pressing close to its mother for warmth. You can almost hear the faint suckling sound under the din of voices and fire crackle. The floor trembles slightly as the animals shift, hooves thudding softly in straw. In this world, warmth has a heartbeat, and it isn't just human. At night, the two worlds, human and animal, merge completely. When the fire dies down, when people are wrapped in their furs and the only light comes from the faint glow of coals, the house fills with the steady breath of life. The air becomes heavy with the warmth of bodies, dozens of them, and the walls seem to close in just enough to hold it all in place. It's not silence, but it's peace of a kind. You lie there listening to the mixture of sounds, the low murmur of a cow's breath, the crackle of settling wood, the soft snore of a sleeping man. In that half-darkness, you can't tell where human life ends and animal life begins. It might seem strange, but for the Vikings this intimacy wasn't degrading. It was sacred. Their myths spoke of beasts as companions to the gods. Odin's wolves, Freyja's cats, Thor's goats that could die and resurrect each day. Animals weren't just property. They were partners in survival, creatures who shared the same fate and the same shelter. The warmth of their bodies was seen as a gift, something to respect. Killing them for meat wasn't casual. It was ritual. Before slaughtering an animal, a farmer might whisper thanks to it, acknowledging that its heat had already kept him alive many nights before. You shift your weight and feel the subtle vibration of life underfoot, the pulse of the longhouse itself. It's not metaphorical, it's real. The combined breathing of animals and people changes the temperature, the humidity, even the rhythm of the air. Some nights when the wind outside dies down, the house seems to hum faintly, the low resonance of a shared heartbeat traveling through timber and turf. Maybe that's why Viking sagas describe homes as living beings, with spirits that could be angered or appeased. If you forgot to feed the animals, the landvater, the guardian spirits, might abandon you, and the house would turn cold. The punishment for neglect was simple. The warmth would leave. You crouch down and run your fingers through the straw at your feet. It's damp, but warm. Beneath the top layer lies a rich compost of waste and hay that ferments slowly, releasing heat. Farmers in northern Norway still use this method today. The muck heat that radiates upward from decomposing material. It's not romantic, but it works. The floor becomes a living heater, crude but effective, turning decay into comfort. You can imagine the faint warmth seeping into your knees as you kneel, the smell strong but strangely satisfying. Even waste becomes part of the cycle. Another reminder that nothing in this world is useless. As the evening deepens, the sounds quiet, the animals settle, the fire drops to a soft glow, and the air grows still. You lie back on your bench and feel that shared heat rise through the floor, through the air, through the thin space between you and the beasts. It's a strange kind of closeness, not affection, but a deep, unspoken alliance. Humans and animals side by side, breathing the same smoke, sharing the same struggle against the cold. Outside, the snow thickens, pressing against the walls with a muffled hiss. Inside, the warmth holds. You close your eyes and listen to the slow rhythm of it all, the creak of timber, the sigh of breath, the occasional low moo or bleat in the dark. You understand now why the Vikings kept their animals so near. It wasn't about convenience or laziness. It was about survival by companionship, about turning every living thing into an ally against the void. And as you drift towards sleep again, surrounded by the shared warmth of fur and flesh, a final thought crosses your mind, that maybe in this smoky, crowded living house, no one was ever truly alone. By the time darkness folds over the Longhouse again, the outside world has disappeared entirely. The snow presses higher against the walls, muffling everything beyond them, and inside, the night becomes a slow ritual of endurance. The Vikings didn't just fight the cold with furs and fire, they fought it from within, with food, drink, and stubborn will. Every meal was a weapon, every sip of ale, a small rebellion against frostbite and despair. Tonight you sit close to the hearth, a wooden bowl in your hands, and the smell rising from it is thick and smoky and alive. The stew inside is more survival than cuisine, a dense, oily mix of barley, onions, and whatever animal happened to die least recently. It doesn't taste good, but it fills the body like heat poured into the veins. Fat is what matters here. Fat is warmth. Every spoonful feels like lighting a fire under your ribs. You can imagine the Vikings knowing this instinctively, that to fight cold you must burn from the inside out. And so they ate, endlessly, salted fish, dried meat, fermented milk, anything that could last through a season when the world itself seemed to freeze. You take another bite and feel the heat spread. Around you others are eating too, their faces lit by firelight, their shadows flickering like ghosts on the walls. Someone passes a jug of ale, thick, dark, bitter. It's closer to liquid bread than beer, heavy with grains and smoke. You drink, and it burns in your chest. A moment later, warmth blooms at the back of your neck. The air feels less cruel, the sound of wind outside less sharp. Alcohol doesn't create heat. It tricks the body into thinking it's warm. But in a place like this, illusions are good enough. The Vikings brewed everything. Ale, mead, even weak beer for children. Mead especially was sacred. Honey turned to fire. The sagas say it carried wisdom, that Odin himself stole it from the giants and drank until he could speak in poetry. You take another sip and understand the myth. After days or weeks trapped inside with the same people, same smells, same cold, even a few gulps of fermented sweetness must have felt divine. It wasn't just drink, it was permission to feel alive. In the far corner, someone begins to hum, low and rhythmic, a tune older than language. A few voices join in, their harmonies weaving through the smoke. The sound vibrates in your chest, warm and rough like the texture of wool. Maybe this is how the Vikings kept their sanity, by turning monotony into music. You can almost hear the echo of those songs carried across centuries, still lingering in the wood of the longhouse beams. Then the laughter starts. Someone tells a joke in the dark, something about frostbitten toes or a neighbor's missing goat, and the whole room erupts in hoarse amusement. It's not joy exactly, but something tougher, deeper. Humor becomes a kind of armor, a shield against despair, The Vikings, for all their reputation as stoic warriors, were masters of laughter born from misery. They joked about everything: death, cold, hunger, even the gods themselves. Maybe that's why their culture endured so long, not because they conquered the world, but because they knew how to laugh while freezing in it. When the food is gone and the laughter fades, someone fetches a small horn filled with mead. It's passed hand to hand, one sip each, no waste, no greed. The horn circles the room like a slow comet, carrying warmth wherever it goes. You take your turn, the honeyed liquid coating your tongue, and for a moment it's like sunlight has returned to the world. The mead leaves your lips sticky, your fingers numb, your heart steady. The fire pops, sending a spray of sparks into the air, and you swear one lands on your skin but doesn't burn. Maybe that's what survival feels like: pain that doesn't hurt anymore. The Vikings were masters of preservation, not just of food but of spirit. They dried fish by smoke, salted meat until it was hard as wood, fermented milk into something that could survive a voyage across the sea. They understood that winter wasn't an obstacle. It was the world's natural state, and you either adapted or vanished. Every bite they took, every sip of drink was an act of defiance against that truth. The calories kept them alive, but the ritual, the act of gathering, sharing, and drinking together kept them human. You glance around the hall as the meal ends. People settle back onto their benches, bellies full, eyes heavy. The fire glows steady now, bright enough to push back the shadows but soft enough not to hurt the eyes. The air feels warmer, not because of the fire alone, but because of everything that's happened around it. The laughter, the music, the eating, the living. Warmth, you realize, isn't just temperature. It's proximity, motion, sound, all the small things that keep the cold outside where it belongs. Someone hums again, softer this time, and you find yourself swaying with it, half drunk, half drowsy. The longhouse smells like roasted fat and wood smoke, like a feast long past but somehow still happening. You close your eyes and imagine what it must have felt like to live this way year after year, to face a winter that lasted half the year, and still find reasons to sing. The Vikings didn't just survive the cold, they learned to dance inside it. You stretch out on your bench, the fur heavy over your shoulders, the faint burn of mead still in your throat. Outside, the wind howls across the tundra, but inside, everything hums, the slow rhythm of life, steady, defiant, unbroken. And for a brief moment you understand the secret of the North. Warmth isn't something you find, it's something you make together. The night has deepened to that strange northern stillness where even the air seems to pause between heartbeats. You've eaten, drunk, laughed, and endured the smoke long enough to forget that the cold exists, until the fire shrinks again, its orange pulse fading into dull embers. The sound of the wind returns, sliding like a knife along the turf roof, and the room exhales a long, weary sigh. Around you, the longhouse sinks back into its other life, the world of dreams and half-wakefulness, of flickering shadows and whispered stories meant to last until dawn. Sleep, for the Vikings, was not one long oblivion, but a negotiation. They lived by the rhythm of segmented sleep, two halves of rest divided by a waking hour in between, a quiet interlude they called the watch of the night. During that time, people tended the fire, whispered prayers, or simply stared into the dark. You can imagine it now, a few figures rising from the benches, their outlines ghostly in the red light. Someone pokes at the coals, someone else adds a log. The crackle fills the silence like a voice. You lie still, half awake, half dreaming, the fur heavy on your chest. Smoke curls above you in slow, hypnotic loops. The air smells of wet ash and animal breath, of earth warmed just enough to keep death at bay. You can almost feel the centuries pressing close, the repetition of this same night, lived by thousands of others before you, the same coughs, the same soft laughter, the same flicker of fear when the wind howls too loud. This isn't just sleep, it's a performance of survival that has been running for 1,000 years. Someone stirs beside you. their voice a low murmur in the dark. Still burning, they whisper, maybe to the fire, maybe to no one. You hear the creak of timber and the faint rustle of straw. Then, as the flames catch again, the light paints everyone's faces in gold and shadow. You can see the exhaustion there, but also the peace. For a few moments no one speaks. The only sound is the hiss of resin in the wood, the occasional grunt of an animal shifting in its pen. In that hush, it's easy to understand why the Vikings filled their nights with stories. Not grand sagas of gods and heroes, those were for daylight and feasts, but small stories whispered between breaths, tales of ghosts that wander the snow, of ancestors watching from the smoke hole above. They believed that when the fire burned low, the line between living and dead grew thin enough to touch. You can almost see it now, the way the smoke folds around the rafters like spirits gathering to listen. Maybe that's what kept people awake during the watch. Not fear, but reverence. You shift under your fur, your body caught between comfort and chill. Outside, the cold presses harder against the walls. The longhouse creaks in protest but holds. The warmth here is not heat as you know it. It's a fragile equilibrium, the balance of breath, fire, and faith. Everyone contributes to it simply by existing. The air you exhale, the space you occupy, the sound you make, they all feed the house's quiet resistance to death. Even sleep becomes communal. When one person rises to feed the fire, they keep everyone alive. When one cough echoes in the dark, it reminds the others to breathe. You close your eyes again and drift into that in-between place the Vikings must have known so well, a space where dreams feel less like escape and more like continuation. You dream of snow swirling outside, of frozen fjords under pale moonlight, of ships locked in ice, but even in that dream, you feel the pulse of the longhouse beneath you, the warmth of bodies, the scent of smoke, the steady heartbeat of survival. Hours later, a faint blue light begins to seep through the cracks in the roof. Dawn is coming, though it barely looks different from night. Someone rises to open the smoke hole, and a single beam of cold light falls across the room, turning the air to dust and silver. The fire, now just a skeleton of embers, is stirred once more to life. The longhouse groans as if waking from its own sleep. Another day begins. You sit up slowly, wrapped in your fur, breath misting in the thin air. You can feel the exhaustion of the place. Not despair, but a kind of timeless fatigue. The people around you move quietly, already tending to their chores, mending tools, scraping frost from pots, checking on the animals. No one speaks of comfort or hardship. There's no such distinction here. There is only living, and the small, stubborn rituals that make it possible. Outside, the cold waits, endless and unbending. Inside, the world hums softly. Firelight, breathing, the faint clatter of wooden spoons. You realize that this is what the Vikings mastered, the art of staying alive in a place that never truly forgave them, not by conquering nature, but by joining it. The house, the people, the animals, the fire, all parts of the same fragile equation. And in that equation lies their quiet genius. You look toward the open smoke hole, where dawn spills through like a blessing. The air shimmers with heat and frost together, the final balance between two enemies that have learned to coexist. Somewhere beyond that light, the world waits, harsh, frozen, and real. But for now, in this smoky sanctuary of wood and breath, you understand how the Vikings managed to sleep without freezing to death. They didn't fight the cold, they made peace with it. The fire fades to a quiet glow, and the smoke softens into a thin silver veil above your head. The sounds of the longhouse dissolve one by one, the shuffle of boots, the groan of wood, the sigh of wind pressing against the walls. You breathe slowly, tasting the air that has kept generations alive, faintly bitter, faintly sweet, still heavy with warmth. Somewhere nearby, an ember cracks, a final heartbeat of flame before it settles into ash. The cold is still there, just beyond the walls, patient and endless, but for this moment it feels like a faraway thing. You lie back on your bench, and let your body sink into the fur. It's heavy, warm, and smells faintly of earth. Your eyes trace the low beams above, blackened, ancient, gleaming softly with soot, and you realize how many winters they've endured. The air here carries centuries, the breath of every person who ever slept in this space, every cough, every whispered story. You can almost feel them, quiet company in the dark. Outside, dawn brushes the snow with a blue light, but inside the longhouse, time slows to nothing. You hear only the faint rhythm of breathing, the gentle snort of an animal dreaming nearby, the soft hum of warmth made by life itself. It's imperfect, smoky, fragile, but it's enough. You take one last breath of that thick, living air, the air that fed fires and hearts through centuries of night, and feel it settle inside you like memory. The cold presses closer, then gives up. The house holds. The warmth lingers a little longer. And as your thoughts dissolve into the quiet, it feels for just a moment like the world itself is exhaling with you, like a candle going out.